When my son-in-law leaned across the notary's table and told me to sign the papers before this gets embarrassing for everyone, the room went quiet in a way I'd never heard before. Not the polite quiet of a professional office, the kind of quiet that happens when something shifts, when the air itself seems to hold its breath. The notary, a woman I had never met until that morning, looked up from her folder. She looked at me, really looked. And then she said, very softly, "Mrs. Beaumont," not the name on the documents in front of her, my maiden name, a name I hadn't used in 40 years. My daughter stiffened. My son-in-law's hand stopped moving. And I understood, in that particular way you understand things when you've lived long enough, that what was about to happen had been set in motion a very long time ago. Let me go back to the beginning. I grew up in Fredericton, New Brunswick, the second of 4 children in a family that had very little money and enormous amounts of pride. My mother ironed other people's shirts in our basement. My father worked on the highway crew until his back gave out, and then he worked the counter at a hardware store until the day he retired. I learned early that you kept your head down, you did your work, and you didn't make a fuss. That was just how things were. I married Walter at 24. He was a quiet man, a carpenter by trade, with hands that could fix anything and a laugh you could hear from 2 houses away. We settled in Moncton, bought a small house on Elmwood Drive with a leaky roof and a backyard full of possibility. For the next 37 years, we filled that house with everything that mattered. 2 daughters. One of them grew up and moved to Halifax and calls me every Sunday morning without fail. The other one is the reason I'm telling you this story. I want to be fair. My younger daughter, Audrey, was never a difficult child. She was bright and funny and a little too trusting of people who showed her a good time. When she brought Marcus home for the first time, I remember thinking he reminded me of a salesman who just made a pitch he already knew you'd refuse. He was smooth in the way that certain men are smooth, the kind of smoothness that has been practiced. Walter didn't say anything to me that night, but I noticed he shook Marcus's hand a beat too long, the way you do when you're measuring someone. Walter passed away from a stroke 3 years after Audrey and Marcus married. He was in the garden when it happened, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and the maple tree he'd planted the year Audrey was born had just started to turn. I held his hand until the ambulance came. I held it after. He was gone before I understood how much I had depended on his way of seeing things clearly. For 2 years after Walter died, I kept living my life. I had my routine. Up at 6:30, a pot of red rose tea, the CBC morning program on the radio in the kitchen. I still volunteered Tuesday afternoons at the library in town, helping children with reading. I still played cards on Thursdays with my neighbor Gwen, who had lived next door for 22 years and who brought lemon squares every single time without ever being asked. My life was small in the way that good lives sometimes are, full of the kind of meaning that doesn't announce itself. Then one evening in March, Audrey called and said she needed to talk to me in person. They arrived on a Saturday. Marcus came in and walked straight to the living room as if he'd already decided which chair was his. Audrey stood in the front hall looking at the floor, and I had a flash of memory. Her as a teenager, the way she would look at the floor when she'd done something she knew I wouldn't like. "Mom," she said, "the house is too big for one person." I had just made tea. I asked her to come sit at the kitchen table. She didn't. Marcus came to stand in the doorway of the kitchen. He had a folder tucked under one arm, and he was wearing a jacket that seemed too expensive for a Saturday afternoon visit to your mother-in-law's house. We've been looking into some options for you, he said. There's a retirement residence in Riverview that has an opening. Lovely place. A suite, not just a room. Very private. I set down my cup. I'm not sure what you mean by options, I said. The house needs work, Marcus said. The deck is rotting. The furnace is old. You're managing on Walter's pension and the CPP, and eventually maintenance is going to be more than you can handle alone. We're trying to be practical. Audrey still hadn't sat down. She was looking at the window. Audrey, I said, do you want some tea? Mom, we've already been in touch with the residents. There's a waiting list, but Marcus arranged. When did you contact them? I asked. She looked at Marcus. That look, the one that travels between two people who have already decided something and are presenting it as a question. A few weeks ago, she said, we wanted to make sure there was availability before we brought it up. I thought about Walter's workbench in the basement, still covered with his tools exactly as he'd left them. I thought about the garden he built over 20 years, bed by bed, the rhubarb that came back every spring on its own. I thought about the wall in the hallway where I'd marked both girls' heights every year until they were too old to stand still for it. I won't be going to Riverview, I said. Marcus opened his folder. We had the house assessed. Given what it would take to bring it up to current standards, you'd be better off selling while the market. I didn't ask for it to be assessed. He kept going as though I hadn't spoken. That was the thing about Marcus. He wasn't cruel in the way that makes people flinch. He was the kind of man who simply moved past you, the way water moves around a stone, as though your resistance was just a slight inconvenience in his path. They didn't stay for supper. I hadn't thought to offer it. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I'd left the radio off. The house was very quiet, and I became aware, in a way I usually kept at a distance, of how much of the silence had Walter in it. His chair, his reading glasses still on the side table, the particular way the house settled after 9 o'clock, a soft creak in the third stair that had been there for 20 years and that I had simply stopped hearing until now. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. And sometime around 2 in the morning, I did something I had been putting off since Walter died. I opened the accordion file he kept in the bottom drawer of his desk. Walter was a carpenter, not a businessman, but he had been careful in the way. Careful men are careful. Quietly, without fuss, without ever drawing attention to the fact. There were tax files going back 15 years. There were insurance policies I didn't fully understand. And at the very back, in an envelope sealed with tape and addressed in his handwriting, my name. My hands weren't steady when I opened it. There were 2 documents inside. The first was a will updated 8 months before he died that I had known about in a general way, but had never read carefully. What I had not known, what Walter had never told me, was the second document. It was a statement from a numbered company, a property holding company registered in New Brunswick. The company owned 3 things: a duplex on Robinson Street that I had never heard of, a small commercial unit in the strip mall on Wheeler Boulevard that was currently leased to a physiotherapy clinic, and a condominium unit in the building on Gordon Street, the building where Audrey and Marcus had been living for 4 years, the building where they paid rent every month. I sat with that paper for a very long time. At the bottom of the envelope, underneath the documents, was a letter written on Walter's carpenter's notepad in his big, careful printing. Bev, if you're reading this, I'm not there. I'm sorry for that more than I can say. I didn't tell you about any of this because you would have insisted we give it all away or use it for everyone else before you ever used it for yourself. You know I'm right. I need you to know that the building on Gordon Street, Audrey and Marcus's building is ours, has been since the year they moved in. I didn't plan it that way. The opportunity came up, and I took it because the numbers made sense. I didn't tell Audrey because I didn't trust Marcus to know. I want you to use that how you see fit. There's a woman named Phyllis Okafor at Coastal Property Trust in Moncton. She's been managing everything. She's expecting to hear from you. You are not alone. You were never alone. I just ran out of time to tell you. All my love, Walter. I didn't call Phyllis Okafor that night. I sat in Walter's chair until the kitchen window turned gray with morning. Then I made tea and I thought about my husband, about the man who had never once in 37 years made me feel small, and I thought about my daughter standing in the front hall looking at the floor. I called Phyllis the next morning. She picked up on the second ring. When I told her my name, she said, "Mrs. Beaumont, we've been hoping you'd call." Her voice was warm and direct, the voice of someone who did not waste time. "Can you come in this week?" I went on Wednesday in the Goodwill coat I'd bought the year Walter retired. Phyllis was a woman in her early 50s, sharp-eyed and efficient, with a way of explaining complicated things simply that I appreciated enormously. She sat me down with a coffee and a folder, and she walked me through everything Walter had built. The duplex on Robinson Street had been fully tenanted for 11 years. The commercial unit on Wheeler had a long-term lease with 2 years remaining. The condominium on Gordon Street, Unit 4B, where my daughter had hung her curtains and arranged her furniture and never once wondered whose building she was standing in, generated monthly rental income that had been depositing into a trust account since the month they moved in. "Your husband was conservative but very consistent," Phyllis said. "He never overextended. Everything is clean. The total value between the properties and the trust account," she turned the paper toward me, "is here." I looked at the number. I put the paper down. I picked it up and looked again. "Does anyone else know about this?" I asked. "No one," she said. Walter was very clear about that. I drove home slowly. I went in through the back door, past the rhubarb that was already starting to push up through the cold ground. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, just standing. Then I put the kettle on and I sat down and I started to think. 2 weeks later, Marcus arrived at my door without calling first. He had a document with him that he referred to as a family transfer agreement. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten breakfast for 20 years, and he explained in his smooth, careful way that transferring the property into his and Audrey's names would simplify everything and provide me with a monthly allowance from the estate. "I'd like to have my own lawyer look at this," I said. "Beverly," he said. He had taken to calling me Beverly instead of the usual, and I noticed it had the quality of someone deciding to shorten a distance they hadn't earned. "This is a straightforward document. There's no need to complicate it." "Then it won't take long for a lawyer to review it," I said. He looked at me with an expression that seemed to calculate how serious I was. He must have decided I wasn't very serious because he said, "I want to be direct with you. Audrey has already signed off on this approach. And frankly, if you're not willing to work with us cooperatively, we may need to look at whether you're in a position to be managing a property like this on your own." "Managing it," I said. "At your age living alone, it's a reasonable question." I folded my hands on the table. "Thank you for coming by, Marcus. I'll be in touch." He left a document. I put it in Walter's accordion file and called Phyllis the next morning. What happened over the following 6 weeks I will not pretend was easy. Audrey stopped returning my calls. Marcus sent a second letter, this one from a lawyer I'd never heard of. suggesting that cognitive assessment might be in everyone's interest given my resistance to reasonable planning. I sat with that letter at the kitchen table and felt something I hadn't felt since I was a young woman being told what I was and wasn't capable of. The anger was clean and cold, and I was grateful for it. Phyllis referred me to a woman named Caroline Wynne, a solicitor in Moncton who worked primarily in estate and property law. Caroline was calm and methodical, and she had the kind of energy that makes you feel like the ground beneath your feet is solid. She reviewed everything Marcus had brought, and she reviewed Walter's actual documents, and she said, "Mrs. Beaumont, you are in a considerably stronger position than they know." We made a plan. I would not go on the offensive. I would wait. And when the moment came, I would be ready. The moment came on a Tuesday morning in April at the office of a notary Marcus had arranged, where he had scheduled what he called a family meeting to finalize the transition. I wore my wool coat. I carried the folder Caroline had prepared. I arrived 7 minutes early. Audrey was already there when I walked in, sitting beside Marcus, and she looked at me with an expression I recognized from her childhood, part hope, part apology, part the exhausted look of someone who has been talked into a position they're not sure about and has been holding it so long they've forgotten what they originally thought. Marcus stood and gestured toward the chair across from them as though he were chairing a board meeting. Beverly. "Good, let's get this sorted." The notary was a woman I hadn't met before, mid-40s, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She was reviewing the documents in front of her, and then she looked up. She looked at me, and she said quietly, "Mrs. Beaumont?" Marcus frowned. "That's correct." But the notary wasn't looking at Marcus. She was still looking at me. Did you used to volunteer at the Moncton Public Library? On Saturdays? Years ago." I looked at her more carefully. Something moved in my memory, the way an object shifts in deep water. "I volunteered on Tuesdays," I said slowly, "for about 12 years, until recently." She took off her reading glasses. "My daughter had a severe reading delay when she was 7. You worked with her every week for 2 years. Her name was Josie." She stopped. "You told her that slow readers often become the most careful thinkers. She's in law school now. She's wanted me to find you for years." The room was very quiet. Marcus cleared his throat. "That's lovely if we could just—" "I need to stop," the notary said. She was still looking at me. "I need to stop before we proceed any further, before I witness anything." She set the document down. "I have some questions about this transfer." Marcus's voice sharpened. "These are standard." "Mr. Arsenault," she said, "I am the notary in this room. I set the pace." She turned to me. "Mrs. Beaumont, do you have independent legal representation?" "I do," I said, and I took Caroline's letter from my folder and placed it on the table. What followed was not dramatic in the way of television courtrooms. It was quiet and professional and very thorough. The notary reviewed the documents line by line. She identified 3 clauses that she said she would not witness as written, including one that transferred power of attorney in a way that would have given Marcus control over my financial decisions. She asked me directly, twice, whether I was signing voluntarily, and I said no, and that I required the document to be reviewed and revised before I would sign anything. Marcus stood up. His face had gone the color of old cement. "You have no idea what you're disrupting. This has been planned for months." "I'm aware," I said. "Audrey," he said, turning to my daughter, "tell her." Audrey had been very still for the last 10 minutes. She was looking at the document on the table, not at Marcus, not at me. When she finally looked up, she looked at me. "Mom," she said, "I didn't know about the power of attorney clause." Her voice was careful and small. "He told me it was just the property transfer." "Audrey," Marcus started. "I didn't know," she said again, and this time she was saying it to the notary. That was the beginning of the end of that particular plan, though not the end of everything. Marcus left the notary's office before the meeting formally adjourned. Audrey and I sat in the parking lot in my car for 45 minutes. She cried, which she almost never does. She got Walter's composure, and I am glad for it, usually. She told me things she had been keeping back, how Marcus had lost a significant amount of money 2 years earlier in a private investment that had collapsed, how they were behind on their rent, the irony of which I did not point out just then, how he had been the one to initiate the conversation about my house, presenting it to her as though it were a concern for my well-being. "I wanted to believe he was right," she said. "It was easier." "I know," I said. I did know. It's easier to believe someone you love is looking out for everyone. "I should have called you," she said. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have just called." I put my hand over hers. It was cold, the way her hands always were, just like her father's. In the weeks that followed, Caroline filed the necessary documents to make the structure of Walter's estate entirely clear and legally unambiguous. Marcus consulted his own lawyer, who apparently advised him that the position he was in was not a strong one. Audrey and I spoke on the phone every second or third day, carefully at first, then more like ourselves. She told me she had started talking to someone, a counselor, which I was glad to hear. 3 months later, Audrey asked if she could come and stay for a few weeks while some things were being sorted. I made up the back bedroom. The first night I made the chicken soup I used to make when she was sick as a child, and she sat at the kitchen table and ate 2 bowls and didn't say much. That was all right. I was used to the kind of company that doesn't need to fill the silence. She stayed for 3 months. I won't tell you that everything was repaired quickly or completely. That is not how these things work. There were conversations that were hard, things we said and things we had to unsay, and a lot of sitting in the same room without speaking, which is its own kind of repair. But the house felt different with her in it, purposeful. I want to say something about the notary, whose name I should tell you is Danielle Fortier. After the meeting, she called me to apologize for any irregularity in how she'd handled things. I told her there was nothing to apologize for. She said she had always wanted a chance to thank me, that Josie, her daughter, the law student, had asked her to find me for years. I told her that Josie had done all the work herself. I had only sat beside her. "She says you told her that slow readers become careful thinkers," Danielle said. "I believe that," I said. "She's going to specialize in elder law," Danielle said. "She wants to help people in situations like yours." I've thought about that a lot. The way things circle back. The way a small thing done without expectation can travel 20 years forward and arrive at exactly the right moment. Walter's estate remains in my name. The properties are managed by Phyllis and her team. The duplex on Robinson Street needed a new water heater last November, and I authorized it over the phone in about 3 minutes, which would have astonished the woman I was 18 months ago. Audrey is living in Halifax now, which is where she wanted to be. She found work she actually likes, which Marcus had been discouraging for reasons that are not complicated. She calls on Sunday mornings, same as her sister. Sometimes they call together, and I sit at the kitchen table with my tea, and I listen to them argue about something small, and I think about Walter. I still volunteer at the library on Tuesdays. Last month, a new child started, a boy named Eli, 8 years old, who holds the book too tight and sounds out each word as though it might escape him. I've seen that before. I sat with him for an hour, and at the end, I told him that the best readers are the ones who don't rush, because they're the ones who remember everything they read. He looked at me very seriously and said he would try. I think about the folder in the bottom of the desk, the letter in Walter's printing, the rhubarb coming up through the cold ground every spring without being asked. I think about how much I didn't know about my own life and how much turned out to be there anyway, waiting. There is a difference, I've come to believe, between being protected and being seen. Walter protected me, and I am grateful for that every day. But Danielle Fortier, a woman I had never met, remembering a kindness I had long since forgotten, she saw me. At the exact moment when someone needed to. I am 68 years old. I live alone in my house on Elmwood Drive with the garden Walter built and the rhubarb that comes back on its own, and Gwen next door who brings lemon squares every Thursday without being asked. My life is small in the way that good lives sometimes are, but it is mine. And that, it turns out, is everything. I still think about the rhubarb sometimes, how it comes back every spring without anyone tending to it, without anyone asking it to. Walter planted it along the back fence the year we moved in, and it has never once failed. There is something in that I keep returning to. When I look back at what happened, the folder in the desk, the letter in his printing, the room going quiet when Danielle said my name, I don't see it as luck. I see it as the result of a long chain of ordinary choices that none of us were paying attention to at the time. Walter chose to be careful and honest with money year after year, without anyone watching. I chose to sit beside a 7-year-old girl who was struggling with words, week after week, not because I expected anything from it, but because it seemed like the right thing to do. Those choices didn't disappear. They accumulated, quietly, the way savings do. And when the moment came that I needed them, they were there. Marcus understood leverage and transactions. What he didn't understand, what people like him rarely do, is that the most important things a person builds can't be put in a folder. The trust Phyllis had for Walter, the gratitude Danielle carried for 20 years without being asked to. The fact that Audrey, when she finally had to choose, chose honestly. None of that was accidental. It came from how those people had been treated over a long time by someone who wasn't keeping score. I've thought a lot about Audrey. I was angry for a while, in the way you're angry when someone you love chooses comfort over truth. But I've come to understand that the clearest thinking is often the hardest, especially when you're inside a life that has been quietly shaped for you by someone else. Audrey had to find her own way back to herself. That took something real from her, more probably than anything it took for me. The willingness to look clearly at a situation and say, I was wrong, and I'm going to do something different now, is not a small thing. I watched her do it, and I am proud of her for it. What I know, after 68 years of living, is this. The people who try to make you feel small are usually the ones who have decided that life is a competition with a fixed amount of dignity to go around. It isn't. Dignity isn't a resource that runs out. It's something you carry and something you give, and the giving of it doesn't cost you anything. The woman who sat beside Josie every Tuesday wasn't spending anything she couldn't afford. She was just paying attention, just showing up. I think that is, in the end, what Walter's letter was really saying. Not that he had protected me with money, though he had, but that he had seen me clearly, who I was, what I needed, what I was capable of, and he had trusted that. That kind of being seen is worth more than any property on Robinson Street. My life is still small. I still make tea every morning. I still go to the library on Tuesdays. Eli, the boy who holds the book too tight, made it through a full paragraph last week without stopping, and the look on his face was something I will not forget. 20 years from now, I have no idea what that will mean. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. That's the thing about ordinary kindness. You don't get to know.